I made matcha because I have much to discuss. Here's the first story-based sip and chat. We're gonna talk about Among Us. We're gonna talk about Mafia. We're gonna talk about math, science, and all fun things. So if you'll excuse me for 1 second. There's a few purposes of this video. So yeah, the point of this video is to figure out how Among Us became so popular. It's very fair to just right off the bat just be like quarantine and then move on, because we were all locked in and watching streamers. Let me in. Let me in. But I feel like it was so much more than that. And when I started this like rabbit hole of like Among Us, Mafia, and like how we even got to where we are, it's nuts. It's crazy, and it's so much more than just quarantine. So then that was the next question, is how did Mafia ever become popular just as a game? Because it's just full of lies and deceit. And what about lying and being deceitful? Do humans be like, I want to play that one? We're just going to be honest with ourselves. How did that happen? And so that's what we're discussing today. First of all, the history of Mafia. What's its purpose? Then I broke it down to the sciencey and mathy stuff behind Mafia, how that kind of contributed to its like success and whatnot. And then the history of Among Us. How did it become popular anyways? And why lying is fun and why we do it so often. For starters, the history of Mafia. I became very familiar with the work of a certain psychologist named Dmitry Davidov. He was attending uni in Russia. He was studying psychology, and he had a couple thoughts kind of going through his head of like, yeah, deciphering knowledge, and really information was his like main point. And so his main thesis was, and follow me here, an uninformed majority will always lose a battle of information against an informed minority. When you have information, no matter how brief, you can manipulate a massive group of people. First game ever was played in 1987. The game was called Mafioso, and Davidoff organized this game to combine his psychology research with high school students. And from this point on, it kind of exploded in Russia. And then the important thing to note here is from that one game, it grew like steadily, not because of one person telling another person we should play this game, but mostly other psychologists, scientists, mathematicians jumped at this game and they said, wait, that's actually a really good experiment to prove this. The game contains psychology, collaboration, deception, communication, observation, expression, emotion, judgment ability, mathematical and logical thinking. It creates dynamics involving immersion, social and mastery orientation modes as part of the play. Boring! Power nap. So yeah, he continued his research to conclude a couple of things. One main thing though is he concluded that facts are fundamentally flawed precisely because they are conceived in detached and autonomous circumstances. As such, they remain a pernicious means of perceiving and so dealing with the world. So that's kind of the history of Mafia, the sciencey, mathy stuff behind Mafia. In 2006 is when we finally got some conclusions to the mathy stuff. And it was a mathematician by the name of Braverman who proved that without detectives, i.e. without other roles, and with the perfect amount of players, the randomized strategy is optimal for both citizens and Mafia. When there's a large enough number of players to give both groups similar probability of winning, they showed that the initial number of mafioso needs to be proportional to the square root of the total number of players. That's a lot of words. Here it is in math form. Math. So this little w, m over p, approximate equivalent equal to m over square root of p. Basically, number of Mafia, number of players, you square root that, you divide it. That's gonna give you a probability of the w, meaning winning, of the Mafia versus players, right? It's just a probability equation. I don't know math. I just learned this equation. And with this simulation, they confirmed that 50 mafioso would have a 50% chance to win among 10,000 people. Braverman and the mathematicians, the scientists, whatever, they started doing even more calculations. Within the primal and premature rules of this game, i.e. mafioso versus village people, this calculation checks out apparently. However, if you add different roles and dynamics of the game, you kind of fix the skew for the mafia. So some examples of adding rules would be the game known as Teenage Werewolf, right? Where the mafia at one point or another, every single round have to say the word werewolf at least once each round. Or you could add the dentist, who may select any player at night who can't talk the following day. Or the village idiot, whose objective is to get voted out and then he wins the game. And Davidoff started to pick up on some of these rules, and he claimed that he dismissed all of it, all of these additions, as superfluous, stupid, merely distracting from the game's basic coefficient. Again, he's thinking of this from a science perspective, from a research perspective. And he says, again, the only knowledge in the game is mafia connections. Everything else is artificial.
You stupid.
Psychologist, one by the name of Latour, would surely counter that an altogether artificial game is entirely appropriate these days. In fact, implies a whole other scenario in which the redesign of the game and the ability to observe the consequences of that redesign as and when they happen, and to respond to those consequences in situation, becomes the game itself, i.e. Among Us. So now there's this weird state to the game, but we skip about 20 years in there, and now the game is considered fun. You add things into it to make it fun, but that changes it, right? And Davidoff would dismiss it, like I said. Why? Because the game is for science, it's not for play. Though making things for play, also fun and human nature. Let me use a different analogy. An egg drop, or a boat race. Super basic thing. Why do those things exist? Because they were physics experiments. That was the point of these games that now we just do. So let's talk about for a minute here the history of Among Us. How did it become so popular? Now, I've gathered some quotes from the developers, and I will say I am not sure which developer said what. I am not that well-known, well-versed. The articles just quoted them and it said Inner Sloth, so I know it was Inner Sloth developers. They've said this multiple times. You can look up right now, Inner Sloth devs talk about Among Us. Bam, you're gonna have like 10 podcasts. So you can just understand that they were just attributed to Inner Sloth devs. My little disclaimer as I head into this part of the story. Those that don't know, Inner Sloth Games is the studio that made Among Us. They're the game studio, right? So they are the developers. Also, if I've been talking this whole time and you're like, what even is Among Us? What even is Mafia? I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what to tell you. I've been living under a rock for the past 100 years. So how was Among Us made? Among Us was born from a real life role-playing game called Assassin, which is popular in college dorms. In Assassin, players try to eliminate one another while others hide in an effort to become the last surviving player, or Mafia as we have been calling it. Interesting to note how the name has changed too. The game was made in 2018, 12 years after the initial math and sciencey stuff was kind of going down. I will say there's probably hundreds of research still being done on this game. This is an amazing case study, and that's great. First version of this game was super different, they say. It was super sweaty. You had to run around all the time and like fix tasks in order to keep the ship together. Otherwise, the imposters would just win. And so you were constantly doing stuff to the point where you couldn't look for bodies or notice anything. Let's take it back to Mafia. This game failed, but it didn't work or didn't take off like it does now because it defeated the initial purpose of Mafia. People are just gonna be like, oh, I was on this side of the ship. Oh, I was on that. So it doesn't really do much. It was just playing a video game. In its initial growth and its initial popularity, they said that there was one Korean streamer who had, I think, 90,000 subscribers or something like that. And people really liked it on their channel. And so, yeah, it drew 10,000 players on like mobile and Twitch and Steam. After some more digging, I found that Korean streamer to be, and I'm gonna screw up this name, so we're gonna put their name on the screen, Henry Yang 1125. Anyways, their name being Kim Young Tae, they gathered 20,000 peak viewers day to day with 90k subscribers. Then it was in like July or August of 2019 when the streamer known as Godnot started streaming Among Us. Godnot is a Brazilian streamer with about 2 million subscribers, give or take. And from there, it just kept getting bigger as more viewers saw big streamer play game, I play game. This is taken in 2020. This is the top 11 categories of Twitch based off of July and August of 2020. As you can see, Among Us is only 11 at this point, at 4 million in July. In August, it hit 30, and it would eventually hit its peak in September, October time. It had a 650% increase to player. Nothing on this chart comes close to that. Again, why? Why do we like a game of lies and deceit? Why do we like going into more of its popularity? Popping up right here, you can see from this all of the streamers that took off based only off of streaming the game Among Us. Now, if you notice here, it's not just random streamers. These are already top streamers, and now they're also getting top Among Us views. Meaning Among Us is gonna take off if top streamers that are getting the most viewers already are playing game, big streamer, little viewer plays big streamer's game, right? It's a pretty simple thing. Why is lying fun? And so the fundamental appeal of Mafia is hard to miss. Doesn't always translate to a fun experience. The original game of Mafia and its early adaptations are crude experiences of modern game design standards. They are less like the carefully crafted cocktails of fun we expect from games these days, and more like a bottle of straight up vodka that can quickly go from fun to poison. There are cautionary tales about how friendships have been ruined over Mafia. The game is mechanically too simple and gives little material to the players to play with, which can turn games into unsavory shouting contests and arguments over random events. Over the years, game designers have tried to make their own new cocktail out of this potent vodka. A quote from GameDeveloper.com, with which the writer basically compares this analogy of cocktail versus vodka and how it could be fun, it can be super chill, relaxing, whatever, and then it slowly goes into poison. I love this analogy, not just because my literal channel is about sip and chat, but I love this analogy because it clicks in my head. It just makes sense. And so now the pleasure of the game lies in testing your own skills as a dissembler and as a spotter of disassemblers, in lying and spotting liars. Both eager cooperation and absolute paranoia are essential to the strategic game. Yet the really fascinating thing about Mafia is seeing how much pure irrationality lingers in its play, how little real deduction and how much sheer panic governs its conduct. So the game quickly breaks down, as social groups will, into small circles of belief, which becomes mobs of distrust on the next turn. And this brings me to kind of the end of the video.
Finally!
Of why did Among Us become so popular, and why do we enjoy lying as human society? The game was all about honest versus liars. Now that doesn't seem like such a grand conclusion, but I do think it paints an interesting picture. The game evolved. It feels and plays differently. The crewmates at one point were called honest. And that's all I have for this sip and chat of Among Us and why it became popular. And if you liked it, please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, let me know. Comment below what you want to see next.